And essentially, through 2023, we more than doubled organically. And then 2024, we doubled again organically. Yeah, I think the earliest stage is really about getting going. I see too many founders or, want to become founders. It's like, I'm waiting for this perfect idea, or I had this idea, I'm perfecting it. I'm going and talking to, 100 people and doing a survey and like all of that. Most of what you will learn doing that will end up being wrong. Usually these things come together when like rubber hits the road. Go out, build something really small, like around what you want to do, and go sell it. The acquirer was looking at sort of, the inventory and the store as the asset, and sometimes the owner as the liability, when it's actually completely flipped. Because this same owner, after selling their sort of water bottle brand, would go out and start a yoga mat company. And that would also be incredibly successful.
That's product market fit.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
I call it the product market fit question.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
Product market fit.
I mean, the name of the show is Product Market Fit.
Do you think the product market fit show has product market fit? Because if you do, then there's something you just have to do. You have to take out your phone. You have to leave the show 5 stars. It lets us reach more founders and it lets us get better guests. Thank you. Kazi, welcome to the show, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Dude, I'm excited to have you here because your story is actually like, it's so different. We were chatting, we always do these kind of pre-calls first from you get a sense of what the overall story is. And I mean, the headline is, you start a company in 2021 and you sell it like 3 years later or so for $210 million, which is, it's like absurd no matter how you do it. But the details of it were different because it was kind of like a bit of a roll-up play. So anyways, curious to kind of dive into all that. I frankly, like, not a world that I spend a lot of time in. All the startups we back are typically like, I have an idea and I go out and build it. So I know very little about this, but it's another way to build startups, find product market fit, and hit a huge home run. So excited to learn more about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you're right. We started off as a roll up and then kind of pivoted midway through, which I think makes this story kind of interesting. Now, I can tell you a little bit about how we got started, right?
Yeah, tell me. I mean, give me just maybe some context, like before 2021, like what was happening, and then we'll jump into maybe how the idea came about and all these sort of things.
So obviously during COVID times, the world shut down, in 2020, and while the rest of the world shut down, the digital world took off, especially the world of e-commerce. Broadly speaking, e-commerce was going up and up and up. And in the specific industry we sort of got into, there was some interesting things happening. And this was in the Amazon marketplace. And if you think about, you buy something on Amazon, more than half the time, it's not actually sold by Amazon. It's actually sold by, a different company that's using Amazon as a storefront. Like, think of it like a shopping mall. So the Amazon marketplace was growing really, really rapidly. And the brands inside it were growing really rapidly. And what started happening in sort of 2019, 2020 timeframe was there were all these brand aggregators. A couple of names stand out, Thrasio, Perch, Sellerex, etc. And they were buying sort of these individual brands and sort of starting to aggregate them together.
They would get a bunch of people who made like a similar product and just try roll them up into one big player and get economies of scale on the back office. Is that kind of the play?
That was the general play, the marketed play, let's say. But, there wasn't really, it wasn't necessarily folks selling the same kinds of things. They would buy a water bottle seller and a yoga seller and sunglasses. Like, it's sort of different businesses. So ultimately, a lot of the economies of scale didn't materialize. Fast forward to today, a lot of the aggregators have sort of gone through a lot of restructuring and so on.
Is this what inspires you? Like, you're seeing, let's say, Thrasio and these other players, and that's what brings you into this Amazon world? Or was there any reason you were looking at it already?
Yeah. So it was actually my co-founder, Justin, who sort of ran into it because a number of his neighbors and friends were Amazon sellers who had sold their brands to these aggregators. And then actually we're starting up new brands and then with the idea of selling them again to aggregators. So that was sort of what was going on. And, he talked to a lot of them and just being curious, how did you build your brand? And how
By the way, I'm just curious as a tangent, but what was there? Were they like, oh my God, these guys overpaid, like they're so crazy, like this is free money? Or what was their perspective of this?
A little bit of that. A little bit of that. And a little bit of we would sell the brand, and then performance would stagnate or actually go down shortly after acquisition. And we kept hearing these stories. And what was interesting is, as we heard those stories, our thesis was, this brand aggregation model didn't probably make too much sense because it was all about the operators of the brands. But what we learned was all of these successful sellers who were building these brands and having successful exits were running their businesses really efficiently. And they're running them efficiently by the use of software. If you think about Amazon, like having a brand on the Amazon marketplace, there's like Seller Central, which is the portal, and you can go in and do things. But if you have lots of product, if you have lots of volume, if you're growing really fast, you need it's really hard to do it all manually. So they were using a software for managing their ads, another software for forecasting inventory, another software for recovering revenue that Amazon owed them, another software for their management of their finances.
And how did you find this out? Like just naturally talking to these, or did you do kind of a more concerted effort to do like customer discovery with these sellers?
It's really just natural conversations. If you think about in our backgrounds, we've been, both Justin and I were sort of entrepreneurs by background. And so always curious about, kind of similar to you, how do other businesses get built? And just talking to them, it's exactly a conversation like this. Like, how did you build your business? What did you use to build your business? How did you grow so fast when your competitors didn't? Why do you think you got the exit multiple that others didn't? There was a lot of this kind of conversation, actually.
What was your background, actually, you and your co-founder before this is happening in 2020, 2021?
Yeah, so both of us were entrepreneurs. His was he had built a big sort of direct sales business over the past sort of 15, 20 years all around the world. My background, also a serial entrepreneur. I started my first business in 2015, which was in the clean tech space. Then after some time, I actually started a business that was a roll-up of mental health clinics, where we were buying clinics and sort of putting them together. And Justin, who I knew through a mutual friend, was an investor in that business. And so that's how he and I know each other. And as I was selling that business, he was having these conversations. He pulled me into a few of them.
So the first business was tech. The second one was more kind of P roll-up, small business, mid-market sort of thing. And now you're starting to see these things happening.
These things happening. I just done, tech, then roll up. And he's like, going to the punchline of sort of, as we had a lot of these conversations, a common theme was the software and the tools that they were using. And so our insight was, aggregating the brands did not make sense to us as a business model. We did kind of look at that first. But there's all these softwares, and there's these folks that are using like 10, 15 different softwares to run their business. There is value to be created by putting a number of them together, whether it's, technical value, now these softwares are connected and passing data between each other, etc. But even outside of that, value around creating a common brand, going to market together, and cross-selling across multiple tools.
And what did you see, by the way, in on the brand side? Because it's just as important what you didn't do than what you did. Like that made you feel like that model, because it was working for a lot of big players. Like what did you see that made you pause a bit on that side?
I think we got an inside view on sort of the performance of some of these brands. I'm sure a number of the brands did really well, even after getting acquired. But in most of the situations where we were talking to founders like this, they sold the business and, 5 months, 6 months later, or 4 months later, performance was down.
I see.
And what really, made us understand is, selling on Amazon, selling on marketplaces and being successful is difficult. And, unless you have the operators like really deeply in the business, you get some negative reviews or you lose some rankings such that you're no longer on the first page when someone searches something on Amazon. Those things have huge impact on the business. And so if you don't have seasoned operators running these brands and businesses, performance declines.
That's interesting. So it's almost like as you sell to these big, and obviously there's exceptions, but it's almost like as you sell these businesses to bigger players, you lose the most valuable asset, which is actually the operators behind these small businesses many times.
Like in interestingly enough, Justin and I have this sort of inner joke that we talk about. In acquisition of these brands, the acquirer was looking at sort of the inventory and the store as the asset, and sometimes the owner as the liability. When it's actually completely flipped.
That's right.
Is this same owner, after selling their sort of water bottle brand, would go out and start a yoga mat company, and that would also be incredibly successful.
Crazy.
Nothing to do with their inventories, their sort of ability to build that business.
And so on the software side, like, so you decide, okay, like, let's stitch some softwares together. Were there some that you particularly honed in, like these ones are must-haves, or like, how do you, I mean, it's just such a different world. Like, what do you do? What's your first step? How do you approach this?
Yeah, so we looked at, what are sort of all the different softwares being used, what are all the different use cases and jobs to be done. And there are some big sort of, let's say, verticals. There's ads side, there's sort of inventory forecasting, there's sort of financials, there's keyword research, which is, there's product research. And as we sort of looked into it, some of these already had pretty large companies that were winning, and some were sort of more fragmented and were more open space. That's sort of how we thought about where to go in first. We didn't want to go in. If we had a ton of capital, maybe we would have gone and sort of bought one of the large winning companies in one of the large segments, which another company in the space did. There's a company named Assembly that started, I think, a couple of years before us. They went and bought Helium 10 and so on. We didn't have as much capital and so on, so we actually started to go into the white spaces and start building from the sort of smaller tools.
How do you structure this in the first place? Like, who, because it's not typical VC money that's going to go after this. Like, how much money do you raise at first, and from who? Is it debt? Is it equity? Is it a mix? Like, what's the whole structure of it?
Yeah. So interesting enough, so we were basically raising and buying in parallel in the beginning. Like we'd raise some money, buy one or two companies, raise a little bit more, buy a couple companies. And most of our initial funding actually came from sort of individual investors, lots of friends and family, and like lots of friends and some family from sort of Justin.
But what kind of numbers are, like, even let's say your first company, like you're buying it for what, like $500,000, $5 million, like what kind of?
Yeah, $500,000, $2 million. And so essentially the first sort of 10, 12 million we raised from friends and family over the period of the first sort of 6 to 8 months. And
tell me maybe about the first, one of the first companies that you bought, either the first one or like the most interesting one of the first few.
Yeah, there were quite a few that we bought in the beginning. So one of the ones that we'll talk about later, a lot of them we ended up like not growing much or not doing much with. But one of the ones that we still have, for example, is a company called AMZ Alert. It was among I think first 3 or 4 businesses that we bought. It was pretty small, but what it did was, let's say you were selling like USB keys or something like that on Amazon. You need to keep track of it, and you want to see if someone's written a negative review. You want to see if it's out of stock. You want to see if someone else is selling the same thing and has the buy box. It's essentially setting up alerts all throughout your listing, so that you can understand if anything is going wrong with your business or anything that you need to make any decisions on.
Alerts just within your listing or just across the internet as well, so you can see if it's selling or...
You could do it on your competitors, etc., if you wanted to as well. So if your competitor had a similar product, you could see, hey, when did they lower their prices, so that I know immediately.
And like so tell me about this company. Like, how did you find this company, for example?
Yeah, so this one specifically was through actually a broker that was selling it. So they were looking to sell it. But I should talk a little bit about sort of our evolution of how we've bought.
Yeah, please.
Obviously, Justin and I had other than talking to a bunch of sort of sellers, we didn't know much about the industry. So the first few businesses we actually bought through brokers, folks who were looking to sell their business. What we then quickly were able to do is, we kept a lot of the founders on as part of the team.
And just even to go deeper on that, the brokers. So you go out and you literally find like brokers in e-commerce and start talking to them and seeing what inventory they have, who's selling.
Exactly. So there's a number of them out there, like Laytonas and e-com brokers and a whole bunch of others. Essentially, we network our way into sort of talking to the most active folks there. And they introduced us to the first several, and we bought a couple of those companies. Then, as we had more of these sort of founders working with us, that we built our network into this community. And one of the things about, this may be sort of specific here, but probably applies to other industries as well. There's a strong community focus in Amazon where a lot of the sellers know each other. A lot of the sellers know the founders of the softwares. A lot of the software founders know each other, just because, if you think about this entire marketplace business, it really sort of grew up in starting 2014, 2015 with not much external support. It's sort of people figuring it out themselves, and a lot of Reddit boards and so on. So just learning from each other. And so as we know these founders, they're like, hey, I know this other person that's built this business that's going well. You should think about looking at buying them. And then we would get an intro to them, and we would go and pitch them sort of the vision of what we were building. And, if they're interested, sort of acquire them and so on. So that's sort of the first few were through these brokers. And after that, it was entirely through the network that we had built in that community.
And tell me a bit more, maybe this one example or just in general, but like, how do you structure the exits? Because for something like this, like the strategy can be sound, but I mean, it can live and die on, like, if you overpay, then all the value is to the person selling and so on and so forth. So like, how do you structure that?
Yeah, typically we would structure it as, a certain amount upfront, a certain amount, usually in a year or 2 years based on, whatever we negotiated with the seller. And usually there was an earnout component or a shares in Carbon 6 component. So to tie the success of the seller, a large part of the success of the seller to success of...
You typically kept the management team?
In many cases, yeah.
And you're talking what percent? Like, is it usually like 20% upfront or like 50% upfront or 80% upfront? Like, what was the typical formula?
So typical would be around like 40, 40, 20, like 40 upfront, 40 in another couple of years or so, and then 20% as the earnout type.
And then what about just like pricing and valuation? Like was that a challenge, like getting to something that made sense? How do you price these things out?
Yeah. So I think, we were buying pretty small businesses. And so, the multiples were on the lower side, right? Between 2 and 4x of revenue. And again, going back to, I said in the beginning that we started as a roll-up model and sort of pivoted. In 2021 and early 2022, you were raising money at significantly higher multiples if you were sort of getting bigger and sort of had a vision of doing something bigger. And so there was a sort of this arbitrage between what we were raising at and what we were buying these businesses for.
But on the seller side, like in terms of buying them, they were pretty receptive. Like that wasn't necessarily a challenge to get these people to sell it for 2 to 4x revenue?
Not really. I think in many of these cases, the folks we were brought on, if you think about, the software we were buying, they were doing very specific things. And I think a lot of the founders were recognizing, doing this specific thing, how much bigger can I make it? So they had a decision point. Either, raise money and take on risk and let's do more things and sort of build it from that umbrella. Or now they had this option of sort of partnering with us and being part of a bigger vision that we were building together rather than them trying to go out on their own. Didn't work with everybody, but there were a lot of folks that sort of came on with us on this journey.
And then was debt a part of the fundraising formula, or was it all just equity?
It was later, after we had sort of proven the model out a little bit. So I think I mentioned sort of the first 10 million or so we raised sort of from friends and family. We did a Series A beginning of 2022, and then we did a debt round mid or late 2022.
How big was the Series A?
So the Series A in equity was 16 million, and then we got a debt facility later, which was 50.
And what kind of players back like that 16 million? Is that a PE shop, or who kind of backs these sort of players?
It was a VC fund,
Oh, interesting.
White Star Capital. So they're actually kind of Canadian, but we actually work more with the New York office.
I'll say this, like just being upfront, like a lot of this sounds like too easy. You know what I mean? Like the way you're describing it, like I'm just curious, like what parts, because you find out that like, there's a roll-up play. Obviously you have credibility. So fundraising would typically be a lot harder than it was for first-time founder than it was for you, like in terms of you had credibility and all those sort of things and a network. So that's fine. But fundraising is really like the hardest part of making something work. Getting the assets was not necessarily that hard. You leverage brokers, so there's actually like a system that you can put in place to find a lot of these players. What about after, like post acquisition? Like, which part of actually making this all work would you say is the hard part?
I think part of it is we were working like crazy hours. That's for sure. Justin and I joked, like there was a time when he and I got off the phone at like 2 a.m. at night and then got back on a call again at like 5:30 in the morning.
shit.
Or something. So it was some pretty crazy times.
Were you dealing with a lot of overseas?
Some
people?
overseas and just so much to do. Like if you think about, the number of fundraising calls you have to have, then you also have to have calls sort of like sourcing new deals, and then meetings and work to due diligence these companies. And then, after the acquisition, sort of putting it all together, all the while building a team to be able to do all of this. So it was pretty intense in the beginning. I think though, what we initially really heavily focused on, obviously, is the raising money and acquiring the companies. One of the things we didn't do well in the beginning was some of the integration and some of the figuring out the financials and all of that together, because we just wanted to go and we wanted to build pretty fast, because we did feel there was a specific window of opportunity to make our mark, which was, it's the ZERP era, money is easier to raise. There's this arbitrage. If we took too long and sort of didn't build up critical mass, we wouldn't be able to reach escape velocity.
So at first you're almost like just building like a portfolio of companies. So you're just literally buying companies and then they're just still operating like they used to?
Pretty much, yeah.
And then what do you do when you decide it's time to stitch together? Like what are some of the first things that you start to build?
Yeah, so, they say necessity is master of all innovation. So, mid to late 2022, it became pretty much impossible to raise money, regardless of credibility and so on. And suddenly this arbitrage that we were using to sort of buy these companies also disappeared.
And how big were you at that point? Like how many companies did you already have? What kind of revenue?
We had bought a number. I think we had bought over 12 or 13 at that, and we were about 10 million in ARR, maybe just under. And we kind of knew that there was going to be some sort of correction. The level of it and the timing of it, we obviously, like, no one knew. But essentially, we realized you can't just keep buying more businesses. And we realized that, hey, because we haven't integrated any of it, the financial situation of the company was not great, because, we were buying and keeping everything while building a team, as I was saying, to do the acquisitions.
So you're burning, like you're not profitable.
Burning like crazy. Yeah,
okay.
Burning like crazy.
What were you burning? Do you remember, more or less?
I think like the November 2022, we burned like $1 million.
Okay, a month.
And so I remember we had this exec offsite in November, where we got together, and first time we had really sort of pulled together consolidated financials and seeing what revenue is like, what cost is like, what additional money we owe on these earn-up payments and so on. And we were like, holy shit, this is not a good situation.
And what kind of runway, like what kind of cash balance do you guys have?
I think we had like a 6-month runway or something at that time.
That's fast.
Yeah. Because we were raising and buying, it was like we had raised a big pool of money and then slowly buying.
We have tens of thousands of people who have followed the show. Are you one of those people? You want to be a part of the group. You want to be a part of those tens of thousands of followers. So hit the follow button.
Well, it was, like it was par for the course sort of thing. Like everybody that was doing well was just pressing on the accelerator, and a lot of people got caught too late. Obviously you didn't, but like operating the business that way, that tightly, was what everybody was doing. And it's almost what you had to do, because that was the game on the field.
That was the game on the field. And growth at all costs, right, was the mantra of the day. So obviously in a year, right, mid of 2021 to like mid 2022, we had gone from 0 to 10 million ARR. We had bought it, but versus burning it on operations, but, we had deployed, I want to say 16, $18 million or something like that. My numbers might be wrong.
And what's the organic growth rate of that revenue?
Pretty flat at that point.
Okay.
Pretty flat at that point. But, we were looking at it, and investors were looking at it, like, think about how much money most startups burn to get to a 10 million.
That's right. Yeah, if you look at it that way. I mean, 1-to-1 is like insane. If you raise 10 and you get to 10, you're insane, right? Even 2-to-1 is actually pretty decent. You raise 16 to get to 10, pretty solid.
Right.
Uh,
Right. So that was the viewpoint and what we were raising against, right? And sort of that's the model. And that's broadly the Constellation software model, right? Like you can burn money or invest. You have cash and you could invest that cash in growing what you have or buying more. And it's the same, depends on sort of that ratio. That was the thinking, right? But at that point, remember, impossible to raise money, generally flat business, and burning cash was not a good situation.
no, that's right. I always said back then, you need two things. Like either you're a fast grower or you're lean and profitable. But like if you're not a fast grower and you're burning, not good.
Not a good situation. That's when we essentially decided, because we had to pivot to actually building a business. We were starting to see, we'll talk about sort of some organic growth in certain specific parts of our business. We doubled down on those. And essentially, through 2023, we more than doubled organically. We became profitable because we had much tighter controls around cost. And then 2024, we doubled again organically. And then, we were going on to do a raise, and, SPS Commerce sort of came to us through the raise as sort of an interest in sort of buying out the whole company. And, we saw that as an interesting option, and that sort of what we ended up going with.
And that transaction closed late 24 or early this year?
No, early this year. So February, early February.
Tell me about the cost cutting.
We had to do it very aggressively, and we did it sort of in two axes, let's say. One was around, what functions did we need versus not need, and how big certain functions needed to be. How big did engineering need to be? How big did marketing need to be? And so on. And sort of right size the organization, as they say, based on sort of where we were at and where we needed to be and where we need to put our resources.
But just specifically take marketing, right? You look at 12 businesses, you have like 3 marketing people here, 2 here. You sum it all up, you got 20 people in marketing, and you're like, we need 5 or we need 10. Like, then what do? How do you figure out? Do you even know these people well enough? You know what I mean? Like, how do you do that?
We knew most of these folks. And, part of it is, what type of marketing do we need? Do we need email marketing or performance marketing or content? Do we actually want to be more sales-led versus marketing-led? So actually cut down marketing, increase sales. There's a lot of these decisions. And then after that, there was also just looking at how did we want to build and who did we want to build with. That's actually the beginnings of our Toronto office. Before that, we were fully remote with, acquisitions everywhere. And what we realized was, to do what we needed to do from where we were, we needed to build a very certain specific type of company. In that same offsite, interestingly enough, we defined what our leadership principles were going to be, and we really leaned into those in terms of
what were some of the key ones?
We all own Carbon 6 in terms of everyone's an owner. You guys, you go and figure out, what you got to do. We win relentlessly, which is around, we want people who are sort of incredibly relentless and pursue whatever they need to do to, get to the final outcome. There's a whole bunch of these that sort of we leaned in on, sort of the profile of people we wanted to build a company with. And that's there. And I want to be clear, like, we weren't just cutting like crazy. We were cutting and hiring at the same time.
Interesting.
And this is where sort of the little bit of the gamblers in us come out, and which all entrepreneurs are. It wasn't about, okay, let's cut costs so that, at 10 million in revenue, we could be profitable, etc. We were like, we need to take that 10 to 20 or higher. And we need to be profitable at that point or somewhere midpoint. And that's sort of the plan we put in place.
And so just on people, though, you went from how many people to how many people after that decision?
So I don't have the numbers at the top of my head, just
roughly.
Just to give you a sense, though, I think end of 2022, we were probably between 80 to 100 people. End of 2023, we were similar.
Okay. So you probably went down 30% or something and then brought it back up.
Something. Yeah, I don't remember exactly what happened, but it's
so let's talk then about the growth. Like, how do you decide what initiatives to go after? And then I'm sure you did a bunch of different things. Maybe tell me about one that worked especially well.
Yeah. So I think our biggest pivot was actually shifting from being more marketing driven to more sales driven and moving upmarket. And those two sort of come together. if you think about Amazon sellers, we were sort of working with all types of all sizes and types of Amazon sellers. We had a couple of products that were better geared towards sort of larger sellers, folks who are selling, $1 million, $2 million, $20 million, $50 million a year on Amazon. We were starting to see a pretty good amount of traction there. Like Justin, my co-founder, we brought on other folks over time, like Nassim joined as a CRO, Lumen joined as our CEO. All of them had sort of like a sales and sort of sales-led growth background. And, initially it was Justin and Nassim and others just selling some of these products. And we started selling some of the larger and largest sellers on Amazon onto that product. And then that was sort of the initial, like, okay, there's something here. And so, we didn't want to then go out and like hire 20 people, but okay, let's see and let's test what happens. And I still remember we then hired our first 2 salespeople. I want to say, I think November or December of like 2022. Neither of them had sales experience. It was just who could we get in immediately that someone knew. One was a school teacher, one was a personal trainer.
No way.
And I think between the two of them, they closed 50 or 60 or 80 deals in sort of the first month. And that's when we saw, okay, there's something here. There's a demand for this product in this kind of market segment. Let's lean in. And so then we started building up our sales team, focusing our marketing instead of doing sort of across broad-based on everything, really focused on that ICP and these specific products. And through that offsite, we said, hey, we see some traction here. We see all these issues. We need to get here. Let's do a lot of experiments around here and sort of build and see. And as we, invested more, we started seeing more traction.
And that ability to move towards sales and move up market, was that just a kind of change in go to market, or was that driven by the fact that your product was more all encompassing now because you'd stitched all these kind of point solutions together?
It was a little bit of both. It was more of a go to market pivot than a product pivot. But what I'll say is, we had more things to sell to the larger seller. It also then focused our engineering efforts going forward in terms of sort of how we stitch them together and sort of what things we prioritize. But really, the pivot initially was around on the go to market side.
And so what kind of synergies would you say you truly realized by stitching kind of these products together?
I think the synergies were much more on the revenue side. I think there were some on the cost side, right? It's like, we a much smaller marketing team could go across all of them, and a smaller sort of engineering team could sort of handle all of them, reduce cost on AWS on scale, etc. But that is actually minimal and not the big driver of value. What was interesting was we had a product, let's say that was a small product, a small functionality that was $19.99 a month. I'm making up this number, but let's say 1,000 customers. We had another product which was geared towards sort of this larger sellers, which could do let's say it's $1,000 a month. There were a number of customers of that $19.99 product that were large sellers, and we could see, and we were able to go after them directly, being like, hey, you use this, you should use this, and actually significantly increase our revenue.
So pay more, but you actually need way more. This thing's better suited. Yeah, you're going to pay more, but your ROI is going to be high. And then you, as a result, you just kind of 100x or whatever, 500x your ACV.
And then they're different products, right? One does like alerts, the other does the revenue recovery. And so then we had this customer base, we had this network that we've built up from, all these founders that we brought on that were connected in the community. We had built a brand because we'd always been out of these, conferences because we wanted to find softwares and so on. So now that we had a couple of products that were geared towards larger sellers with high ACVs, that we could actually put a sales team behind, the network that we had built because of and how we had built the company, as well as the customer list that we had, became incredibly valuable in sort of growing really fast.
And then this is a bit of a like different, maybe I should have asked it earlier, but it just came to my mind. Like, how did you decide, which businesses to buy? More specifically, like what's a good business versus, a bad business? Which one's actually worth buying or not?
That's one of the things, wish we had known better. I guess I think we were looking at sort of just the businesses on its sort of own traditional diligence, right? It's like, okay, how, what's the revenue, what's its cost, what's its churn rate, etc. And we had bought a lot of different types of businesses, and just based on sort of the merits. Because when we started, if you remember, we didn't have a grand vision of like, we are going to serve this type of ICP with this type of ACV, and that will do sales base, etc. Ours was, does it serve an Amazon seller in some way? And does it have underlying, decent metrics? Okay, let's buy. And, is the multiple we can buy it at, does it give us an arbitrage to what we can raise at? And that's sort of how we made the decisions. And so the ones that we rejected, either maybe had too much tech debt, or like the metrics were bad, or like the founders wanted too much money. Like that sort of was the differentiation. A lot of the companies that we bought, they provided value in the sense that they have the customer list, and they had, allowed us to be more entrenched in the network. It's impossible to know when you're starting a business, like exactly where you will be 4 years from now. And so often the most important thing is to get going and just doing it. We could have spent all of 2021 doing deep analysis and conversations.
You
with
would have missed the window. Yeah,
we would have
100%.
missed the window.
Totally.
Versus like just getting going.
By the way, in that year 2023, when you focused on cost cutting plus growing, did you buy more businesses, or did you stop that part of the business?
We pretty much stopped. We bought one more.
Okay, so you really kind of did the roll up, got the goods, and then optimized was really kind of the two sides of the equation.
Totally.
Let's dive into, maybe spend a few minutes just on the acquisition. Like you mentioned at a really high level, but how did that kind of, I'm sure at some point you thought for a business like this that you would exit, but how did it happen this time?
Really what we were going out to market for was to raise more money for acquisitions, because we felt we were ready to do under the set of acquisitions. And there were sort of a couple of big niches that we wanted to potentially go after. We wanted to go omni-channel. So like we were in Amazon, but there's Walmart and Target and so on. We saw we could build all of that over the next 10 years, or we could actually, similar to like what we did when we got started, short circuit that by sort of buying and getting some of that in.
And growth in that meantime, was it still on that kind of doubling type of ramp?
Yeah. We were growing pretty rapidly that whole time. So when we went out for the race, it was more actually less VC, more sort of PE type players, because it's some acquisitions and so on. What was interesting about SPS Commerce when they came for it is, so SPS Commerce is actually an EDI, historically more an EDI company, connecting suppliers to the retailers that they do business with. And so
what's
all
EDI? What does that stand for?
So electronic data interchange. It's purchase orders, invoices, all of that data moving between retailers and suppliers. That is powered by SPS Commerce's software. What was interesting was they're one of the largest players in this in North America and in other geographies as well. If we think about all those suppliers, most of them sell on Amazon. Most of them sell on Walmart. Most of them sell on others. And there was this incredible sort of cross-sell opportunity that we saw that, would accelerate our growth and journey, far beyond anything we could do sort of ourselves, if executed correctly. And what was interesting was, while our business is very complementary in terms of it serves the same customers, it does something different than what SPS Commerce does. And that was actually their thesis. We have this big network that we have. How do we sort of add on additional software and services that we can provide to our customer base? And that, if you think about the original thesis of Carbon 6, like why we got started, that was our original thesis in 2021. There's a customer. What are more things you can provide them? And that's what we were buying. And so we saw this alignment of vision. And, when you put that with sort of the opportunity of the customer base that they already have and sort of the overlap and so on, we saw that as a massive opportunity to go out and capture.
How long did it take from, first chatting with them to closing the transaction in February?
I think we would have first chatted with them maybe in September, October.
Okay, so it's pretty quick, like 4 months.
Yeah.
And what did they buy? Was it all stock? Was it all cash, all stocks, a mix? Like, was there a big
A
earnout piece?
mix of cash and stock.
And I always ask this question with the transaction. I mean, you had other exits before this one,
Yeah, I did.
so it might be different for you. I typically ask it when it's the first big exit, but in any case, like, I'm always curious on the emotional front of it. Like, what does it feel like? I know it's not the end line. Like, I know the business is still going. I know you're still growing it, but there is like, it is the end of a journey, and it's a big momentous, much bigger than just like raising a round. What does that feel like? Like, to actually get that signed, the money moves over, you know what I mean? Like, that day.
It's a huge milestone, as you said. Like, it is a validation of what we've built to date. At the same time, it's a validation of the vision that we started out with, specifically in the case of SPS Commerce. Because, like, you could have an exit that is, we see sort of what you've built, and you just want to dismantle it and just take your customers, or we just want to take your tech, or we just want, like, whatever it is. The way sort of the acquisition worked was sort of bringing in Carbon 6 and sort of being part of a new product line within SPS Commerce with an expectation to grow really rapidly. That was a validation of sort of the vision that we had started out with, and the fact that we get to continue going alongside SPS Commerce now to grow as fast, if not faster, than we were before. It's super exciting.
But like, that's the logical side. But like, emotionally, is it relief? Is it happiness? Is it like actually it falls flat and it's not nearly as like exciting as you think it might be?
I think with all things in life, like when something big happens, there's like emotions related to that event, and it was happy. Like, at this point, if you think about running the process, you're working like crazy hours. I remember lead up to signing, I was actually, visiting home in Bangladesh, which has a 12-hour difference. So I would start work at 8 p.m. at night and
Oh my
work
God.
in the morning, and then hang out with my parents during the day and repeat. So you're so in it. The signing and closing feels like, partially relief, partially happiness. Everything you'd been working on for 6 months straight, and even before that, as you're growing the company, comes to a conclusion. But then, in like all things in life, a week passes, and sort of then you're back to reality. And I think what I am glad about is the reality is what I was doing before and what I was enjoying in terms of building Carbon 6 gets to continue. Working with the same people I'm working with, working on the same problems I was working on before, but now with sort of a bigger vision and bigger sort of overall partner.
Perfect. Well, let's stop it there. And typically I ask a handful of questions, but we talked actually about a moment where you thought you would fail, which was, near the end of November. And obviously product market fit here is a bit different. So let me ask this one question, which is, when I'm sure you talk to a lot of founders, like, what is some of the most common pieces of advice that you tend to give early stage founders specifically?
Yeah, I think the earliest stage is really about getting going. I see too many founders, or want to become founders, is like, I'm waiting for this perfect idea, or I had this idea, I'm perfecting it. I'm going and talking to 100 people and doing a survey and like all of that. Most of what you will learn doing that will end up being wrong. Usually these things come together when like rubber hits the road. Go out, build something really small, like around what you want to do, and go sell it. People will say a lot of things in surveys. Let them vote with their wallet. What people are buying, build that. And, you may have a vision of sort of going here, and people will tell you like, yeah, that's what I really need. You build the first few features of that, you'll see they don't want to pay for it. They'll pay for this. And that actually sets you on a different direction. So getting started and then being very flexible in terms of where you might end up is probably the most important advice I've ever gotten, and I give to every single sort of founder or entrepreneur or starting out that I give, is the most important thing you can do is get started and be very, very flexible in pivoting in whichever direction. Because what you don't want is you're going on this direction and then things not working, and then there's the word pivot. It's like you pivot the whole company. You hear the stories of the big pivots, and you sometimes hear the stories of the ones that did the big pivot and succeeded. Many don't. It's much better to do lots of small pivots than a big, massive one.
Perfect. Well, Kazi, thanks so much for spending time, man. It's been great.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me.
So guess what? I met this founder who listened to every single episode of the Product Market Fit Show. He just called me and he sold his company for over $1 billion. That's right. If you listen to every episode of the Product Market Fit Show, that's what's going to happen. That's just, it's, I can't say it's guaranteed, but it's what I've seen. It's what I've seen in the past, but you won't know for sure unless you try it out for yourself. So go back because there's over 100 episodes of the Product Market Fit Show and you haven't listened to most of them. Check them out.